its story in and of itself is very simple, but it has a powerful message of, the next generation being able to do what the previous generation was not because of the segregation, and that they fought and changed what they could, and then we're still currently in that fight and in that change for equality for all. Hey everyone, so listen up. Teaching students history is important now more than ever, and that means including how all people, regardless of race and ethnicity, helped build this amazing country. So today I'm going to share with you 3 of my favorite mentor texts to help share important pieces of Black history to use during Black History Month or really any time of the school year. So, welcome to the Ciera Teaching Channel. I'm so glad you're here. And if you haven't done so yet, drop me a comment below and let me know what grade you teach and where you're from. I love knowing that you're out there and listening. So let's go ahead and dive in. I love these 3. I picked these 3 because they're 3 of my favorites, and I hope that either you have one of these in your classroom, or if you don't, that you're able to go out and grab one to share with your students as well. So we're going to dive right in. Book number 1 is called The Other Side. This is a wonderful story. It's about a young girl, and she lives on a piece of land, and there's this fence you can see in the picture here on the cover, and there's this other little girl across the fence. So what happens in the story is it's just a simple story, and the fence ends up being a metaphor for what's going on in our country or in the country during this time. And Mama says in the story to don't climb over that fence when you play. She said it wasn't safe. As the little girl plays throughout the summer, she notices this little girl always watching her from the fence. And all of her friends go to play, and eventually they start talking to the little girl. And she would see the little girl out in town, and she would ask Mama, like, why does it have to be this way? And she says, because that's the way things have always been. And so you're really getting the feel of segregation through this little girl's eyes, not just, the big things like not being able to have, go to the same schools or the same water fountains, but just as simple from this little girl's eyes as not being able to play with a friend her own age because of this fence. And then she finally goes over and starts talking to the little girl, and she introduces herself, and she says, hi, my name's Clover, and my name's Annie. She said, we've been watching each other. And so they decide to sit on the fence together because Mama said they can't go over it, but she didn't say anything about sitting on the fence. So this became a daily thing between these 2 little girls of sitting on the fence and just talking about life and having fun together. And, all her friends would come and play, but she wanted to be on the fence with Annie and spending the summer with her. Mama would even come out and watch, and she never said anything. But she did say at one point, I see you made a new friend. And she said, yep, she introduced her and told her who her friend was. And then I like this little quote here. It says, that summer, me and Annie sat on the fence and watched the whole world around us. And then, it's just a very simple tale or story about these 2 little girls. And at the very, very end of the story, it says, someday, somebody is going to come along and knock this old fence down, Annie said. And I nodded. Yeah, I said, someday. So you can really talk to your students about the metaphor and what does that fence truly represent, and how does segregation look and feel through even the smallest of children, back when African Americans didn't have equal rights as far as, white Americans. And, even children felt the segregation and felt that hurt, in their just day-to-day lives, something as simple as playing outside during the summer. So it's a great little story. It kind of has more of a soft feel, more of a, not laid back talk about segregation, but like I said, more of a softer way to introduce it. So if you maybe have younger grades and you don't want to talk about some of the more hefty issues, this may be a great book for you, but definitely one for even older children to really dive into the symbolism and the metaphors that you see throughout the story. So definitely make sure to grab this one. It's an adorable book. It is by Jacqueline Woodson, and again, it's called The Other Side. This next book is a great one too. The first time I read it, it made me cry. Absolutely made me cry. It is called These Hands. And this is a story about a young boy and his grandfather. And the grandfather, throughout the whole story, is helping his grandson do simple tasks such as tying shoes. And the grandfather, as he talks and is plays with his grandson, he talks about what his hands have been able to do in life. So at one point he says, "Did you know these hands used to make the ivory sing like a sparrow in the springtime?" So right there, great figurative language. Well, I can still show a young fellow how to play heart and soul. Yes, I can. The voice in this story is absolutely great. The grandfather saying, "Yes, I can," at the end of all of these different pieces where he's talking about what his hands can do. "Did you know these hands used to pluck the ace of spades right out of thin air? Well, I can still teach a young fella how to do a waterfall shuffle. Yes, I can." So you can see he's teaching his grandchild or his grandson different things and talking about the past. So it goes on and talks about, how he used to be able to throw a curveball faster than a diving or a dive bombing honeybee. Then it kind of switches gears and it says, "Did you know these hands were not allowed to mix the bread dough in the Wonder Bread factory?" It goes on and it talks about these hands were only allowed to sweep the floors, work the lines, and load the trucks because the bosses said white people would not want to eat bread touched by these hands. So then you kind of get the feeling, again, starting of that soft introduction of segregation. But it says, "Well, these hands joined with other hands, and we wrote our petitions, and we carried our signs, and we raised our voices together. Now any hands can mix the bread dough, no matter their color." So clearly, it doesn't get into those hard details of segregation and what that really looked like, but just a simple story about hands and what they were and were not allowed to do. "Now any hands can touch the bread dough, no matter their color." Yes, they can. And then the back part of the story kind of switches, and now the grandson is talking, and he says, "Look at these hands, Grandpa. These hands used to not be able to tie a shoe, or play the piano, or shuffle cards." And again, they're all things Grandfather was teaching him. "But now I can do all that, plus bake a fine loaf of bread, can't I?" Its story in and of itself is very simple, but it has a powerful message of, the next generation being able to do what the previous generation was not because of the segregation, and that they fought and changed what they could, and then we're still currently in that fight and in that change for equality for all. But this, again, is such a powerful story, the connection between the grandfather and the grandson, and just as simple as talking about hands and what they can and cannot do. Just absolutely insane and powerful and amazing. So definitely make sure to grab this one. It is by Margaret H. Mason, and again, it's called These Hands. So the next one I want to read with you is called A Ride to Remember, a civil rights story. It is by Sharon Langley and Amy Nathan. And you may know the name Sharon Langley because she's actually one of the characters in the book. It goes in and it tells the story of this father, the father's little girl, and they lived in this town, and nearby was an amusement park. But they were not allowed to go to the amusement park because they, of course, had a different skin tone. And at that time, blacks were not allowed. The little girl was very sad that this was happening. And so the daddy is talking, how for a long time, blacks could not do the same things as whites. Black kids could not do many things together with white kids. They couldn't go to the same school. So this story dives a little bit more into what segregation was and what kind of things could they do and not do. But again, it's still a little light and soft, as far as segregation goes. But then it goes into, just wait, times will change. They held protests at stores and restaurants and movie theaters. It talks about how everything in the city started changing, but the amusement park would not. The amusement park was one of the last things in the city to change. It would not budge and change its rules to allow African Americans. So they continued to have protests, to join the Gwen Oak protest, which is Gwen Oak is the park where the amusement park was. And it talks about the specific dates. So on July 4th, which of course is, July 4th, 4th of July, is when they had the biggest protest ever. And they were all there to get equal rights to be able to get into the amusement park. So it just goes on and on. It talks about how the protesters sang, and they were peaceful, and they held their signs, and they sat, and they did, what was right, but people still were arrested. 300 protesters were arrested that day. And finally, the amusement park changed its rule, and the first African-American family was let in to the park. So it says the first day Gwen Oak Amusement Park was open to all was August 28th, 1963, 1 month before my first birthday. Mama told me that at first she was afraid to take me to the park. Would it be safe? Would we be arrested? But she and Daddy decided that it was important for us to be there the first day as a family. So you can see them going to the amusement park, and there's the little girl on the carousel. And the great thing about this story is it's all true. It is 100% nonfiction. The characters in the story are real. The little girl here is actually the author of the story. All of these things did happen. And then you actually learn about this amazing carousel because the carousel really represented, a big change in this town and a big change for African Americans in history. And they actually moved the carousel to Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. It's fitting that it should be there near the monuments that stand for freedom, not far from the Lincoln Memorial, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood to give his speech during the March on Washington. My name, Sharon Langley, was put on the horse's saddle and on one of its horseshoes, too. A sign of the carousel's fence about my ride to remember that on a sunny August day not so long ago. So they actually moved the entire carousel to Washington, D.C. So now all kids, no matter, race, color, gender, everything, they can all ride. And it says the horses are painted of all colors of the rainbow. And then I love this at the very back. You actually get some more history on all of these events that the story did not tell. There's even a timeline at the back. Just an amazing story. So this would be a great one to do maybe a little bit of historical fiction and historical research and kind of see, some similarities and differences here. And maybe have students really look up and can they find a video of the carousel and, what else can they learn about, other people like Sharon Langley who were the first. She was the first African-American to ride this carousel. And it may seem like, it's a carousel, who cares? But everyone should care. That's a huge deal. So what other stories are out there about the first African-American to, attend a school like Ruby Bridges, or the first African-American to blank. So there's stories out there like that about the first for African Americans. So that may be like a fun little research project that your students can do just to show how big of a change the end of segregation really was for everyone. So again, A Ride to Remember. Absolutely love this book. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed my 3 favorite books, again, to use for Black History Month or really any time of the year that we should be using mentor texts with characters of all different races and ethnicities and cultures and sexualities and genders and religions. Just our kids need to be heard. How would you feel if you were never seeing yourself inside of a book as a character? It would be very lonely. Maybe you would even feel a little invisible. So just kind of think about that and reflect, every now and then on what kind of books you're purchasing and what kind of books are in your current classroom library, as it's really important to make sure that we are constantly updating our library and finding relevant books and books that represent our students. So I will get off my soapbox, I promise. But I hope you absolutely enjoyed those 3 titles. If you have any questions about those, let me know. I'm going to put a blog post link of other books that represent African American history in the video description. So make sure to click that. If you want more recommendations, check that out. And we'll talk soon. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you later. Bye, everyone.